The NHL Draft is just days away, and we've talked about who the Predators may pick in the first round, but there are some sleepers the Predators could be interested in later rounds. Today, we're joined by Eric Denay to talk about some interesting Predators sleeper picks.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making the Locked On Predators your first listen of the day every day. We are free and available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and on YouTube. Of course, a special shout out to our everydayers, the Locked On Pred Heads. Thank you for spending your day with us as we talk all things Nashville Predators. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at InsideThePreds.com. And in just a moment, I am going to be joined by my partner in crime, Nick Morgan. Today, Nick and I welcome prospects guru Eric Denay. Now, Eric has joined us on the show to talk about the upcoming NHL Draft, talked about players the Predators could target with their first round picks. But today, Eric joins us to talk about some sleeper picks.
Well, the 2023 NHL Draft in Nashville is now 1 day away. And for the last time before the draft, we are bringing back Penalty Box Radio prospects guru Eric Denay onto the show. Eric, your time is almost here, my friend. It's your Super Bowl Sunday, basically.
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm also extremely tired, but ready for this week of fun ahead.
Yeah, you've had 50 articles a week for the last 4 or 5 weeks, it seems like.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but this is a really interesting draft class, so and I've enjoyed scouting them this year.
Yeah. Well, Eric, in past shows you've joined us, you talked about who the Preds could take at 15. You talked about who the Preds could pick at 24, some of your maybe picks for the top of the draft. So today we're going to focus maybe on the stuff that's not going to happen tomorrow, maybe the stuff that happens Thursday. And we're going to be talking about sleeper options that the Preds can get later in the draft. And I want to start, Eric, by talking about a guy who we're going to see a lot of in the Big Ten next year, and that is Zach Scholl's U.S. national team product and future Wisconsin Badger. What can you tell us about this guy, Eric?
Yeah, well, this is a really interesting year for the U.S. national team at the draft. You know, we've had the past couple of years, we've had really big classes from them. And this year, it's relatively smaller. You know, we've got the kind of 4 forwards at the top of the class, and then there's a pretty big drop off. And that's especially true for the blue line. There's no one on the blue line that really stands out that's really made a name for themselves as like a surefire first rounder. In fact, I'd be shocked if any of their defenders get picked in the first round. But one guy that has stood out to me, as you mentioned, is Zach Scholl, who has played a really interesting role for them this year, and ultimately actually was their captain at the U18 World Juniors a couple months ago. You know, kind of the like one sentence on him is really strong defensive option, lower ceiling on offense. But I think there's a lot of foundation to his game that projects well to the NHL, and, you know, going to play in the Big Ten, I think is also kind of a value add there. So I think he is kind of your definition of a mid-round, swing, someone who you see those projectable skills in and you hope you can kind of extract more out of.
So when you look at him, what are the skills that he has that you think make him a decent option? And what are the areas where you feel like, look, this is somebody who's going to have to grow in this if they're going to crack the NHL roster?
Yeah, I think he is a really strong skater. I think his rush defense is really solid. He mirrors opposing forwards pretty well, maintains his gaps. He attacks his gaps pretty aggressively, but his angles are strong. So he's not always, putting himself at risk of kind of getting exposed with dekes to the slot or things like that. He's physical. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he plays with some bite. He likes to check guys along the wall to force turnovers. He, in one-on-one battles in the defensive end, I think he's really strong. He's got good positioning, good awareness. So yeah, those are kind of the notable strengths. And a little bit too in transition, he steps into his passes. He jumps the zone well. He's not going to like lead the rush per se as some other defenders will. You know, his game at that end almost kind of stops when it comes to dumping the puck into the zone. But I think he's a guy you can count on to be a solid puck mover through the neutral zone. In terms of kind of downsides, I think off the puck in his own end, he can get his game gets a little interesting. I think sometimes when he's not kind of chasing that puck carrier, he kind of loses sight of what he's supposed to be doing and the position he's supposed to be maintaining. So just working on that a bit. And, in my scouting of him this year, I've noticed a good bit of instances of, more complex zone entries where you've got a drop pass and a guy cutting to the slot, something, a little, like I said, more complex than your kind of simple rush chances. He can get caught out a bit by those. So I think just a little more kind of discipline against those chances, will make him be a really effective defender at higher levels.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people have this guy pegged, maybe 5th, 6th round, somewhere in there. Where do you have him ranked? And do you anticipate sort of him going in that range?
Yeah, so he didn't crack my top 96 ranking. Obviously, 96 players covers 3 rounds. So, yeah, I generally agree. I think 4th, 5th, or 6th round is probably right. This is a bit of a sneak peek, or not a sneak peek, I guess. It'll be out by the time folks listen to this, but I've got him on my kind of 4th round draft board for the Preds, particularly with 3 picks there. I think he'd be well worth taking a swing on in one of those middle rounds.
Gotcha. Let's stay with defensemen and talk about another guy, Carter. Excuse me. I'm sure there's a Carl somewhere, but this one is Carter Sotheran, a defenseman from the Portland Winterhawks. A little bit of a bigger guy than Scholes, 6'3", 185 pounds, right-handed shot, which teams seem to salivate over. What's the story on this guy?
Yeah, truthfully, not a player I was all that familiar with going into this season. Hadn't heard his name much. I hadn't watched, intentionally any of his games going into the year. And where I noticed him was that he played most of the year as Luca Cagnoni's defense partner in Portland, who is another top defenseman for this class. And every time I was watching Cagnoni, I just kept noticing his partner and noticing some of the tendencies he was exhibiting, and I really took an interest to his game. So like you mentioned, a bigger guy, his partner, very offensive minded defenseman, loves to activate, very aggressive. So that kind of forced Sotheran to play more of a two-way game, but I think he really excelled at it. I think he's got skills at both ends of the ice that project well to the NHL. I was a little surprised not to see him make Bob McKenzie's final draft ranking, which is a survey of about a dozen NHL scouts. But I am maybe more convinced than anyone that this guy is going to be like a middle pair defender in the NHL for a pretty long time. There's a lot I love about his game.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at him, we're talking about his size. You got somebody who's 6'4", 205 pounds. Does he play a physical game, and how does that affect things like, what do you see from him as far as skating, as far as speed, playing in transition? What do you like, or what are concerns about that for you?
Yeah, he does play a physical game, but not unnecessarily so. He, I don't think he's not lining up guys in the neutral zone to, lay big hits or anything like that. But he is aggressive in his gap control. And when he angles off those players well, he really smothers those chances against the boards with that big frame. So I think he's an excellent rush defender. I think he really understands how to handle players of varying speeds and delay tactics without getting caught out of position. He pivots well. I think he's a strong skater, particularly for his size. He doesn't have elite speed per se, but his skating mechanics, I think, are very good. And you see that in transition well, again, where his partner was really the one leading the rush most of the time. Sotheran didn't get that many chances to do the same, but similar to Scholes, he steps into those D-to-D passes. He jumps the zone quickly. His accelerating steps, I think, are pretty solid. skates with his head up, manages the puck well in transition. And he doesn't always just kind of dump the puck in. He'll gain the zone, he'll pull up, he'll pass it off, and then start establishing those puck supported positions in the offensive zone. And every now and then you got to see an instance where whether it be, encouraging that activation from his partner, or just, the kind of tactics Portland was wanting to use, where he would activate down from the blue line, whether it's for a backdoor chance, whether it was to pass across the Royal Road, whatever it may be, and scored a handful of goals and picked up some assists that way as well. So, certainly not elite speed or elite puck skills or anything like that, but I think he's well-rounded in all those facets, and that's part of the reason why I think he could really make an impact at the pro level.
Yeah, we're not talking about elite speed or anything, but
yeah.
It's certainly, when I read his profile and listen to you talk, I think about the Vegas Golden Knights this past year and that blue line, how there's a lot of size on there, a lot of physicality, but all of those guys could skate. All of those guys, even if they didn't have great breakaway speed, had a lot of lateral quickness. They could keep up with some of the NHL's fastest players. And Ann and I were talking about this yesterday when we were doing our, free agency picks. It's the Predators, I feel like, really need some of those guys in the pipeline. And so when you look at Sotheran, do you see him in that kind of a mold, especially if he can, keep growing some of that skating skill set, into NHL level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great comparison. You guys know I'm not a huge fan of player comparables, but two guys that kind of come to mind in terms of his playing style and his ability are Mattias Ekholm and to your point, Nick, Zach Whitecloud. I think really exemplify a lot of his strengths. And I think Nashville has the development staff to really extract those skills out even further and make him, independent of his D partner, who is really the offensive mastermind here, but make sure that Sotheran can execute those plays with his own, a differing partner at higher levels as well.
I think you had Ann sold at Mattias Ekholm. I think
y'all.
I think you're going to see her deliver the draft card.
And I will scratch out whatever name is on there and add it.
Yeah, exactly. Letting security know now. So Eric.
Coming up, Eric shares with us a Finnish forward he thinks the Predators may want to target in later rounds. Plus, we talk about whether the Predators might try to move up in the first round of the draft. But first, want to let you know this episode's brought to you by our great friends at eBay Motors. Look, for a championship team, it is all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same thing when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time that you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay's guaranteed fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to the My Garage section and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win with the right parts when they're guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
So Eric, everybody on Twitter knows jokingly that you kind of struck gold with a Finnish forward prospect by the name of Juuso Pärsinnen a couple years ago in the draft. A guy that nobody was talking about, that you kept insisting should be a lot higher than people had ranked on their board. This year, you're highlighting another Finnish forward. Looks maybe like a little bit of a different build than Pärsinnen, maybe a different type of player a little bit. What can you tell us about Rasmus Kumpalainen?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think a lot of folks are talking about Kumpalainen, but in my first viewings of him, he did actually remind me of Pärsinnen here and there in a few kind of broader categories. Not the best skater in the world, doesn't really have above average top gear when it comes to kind of NHL level skating. He's not kind of a wizard with the puck per se, but plays a really solid game in all three zones and I mean, he gets results. He's not going to be like a high-end scorer per se, but it's kind of about managing the game for him, pushing the play forward, and helping drive his teammates' ability to finish chances and score those goals.
So in talking about him, one of the things that sort of stood out, or one of the things that people have kind of rumbled about him, is maybe he doesn't have that offensive finesse, but what does he have that makes you think this could be somebody that could contribute on the NHL level?
Yeah, I think he's a really good forechecker. Again, the speed isn't quite there. The stops and starts that need some refinement in that, but his general positioning on the forecheck, I think, is really good. He takes good angles. He cuts the ice in half for opponents, forces them into less than desirable decisions, and that's a really strong asset at the NHL level that not every prospect just inherently has. I think if a team can work on his skating a bit, that kind of becomes even more effective. At his size, I think he can be a really solid kind of net front presence in the offensive zone. If he's going to make it, he's going to score a lot of those like greasier goals. But that's not to say that he can't kind of outmuscle his way and give himself, advantage positioning on defenders in the offensive zone, because he's shown he's capable of that too, kind of diving into the soft ice at the right time and putting home those chances. And then at the other end of the ice, I think his defensive metrics have been really good this season, and I've liked what I've seen of him, engaging in board battles, manning the point. He's not jumping the zone too early. He's pretty responsible on the breakout. And despite the flaws in the skating, he's not a mess in transition, right? He plows forward. He's kind of a north-south guy in that sense. And again, is it overhandling the puck? Is definitely underhandling it. But those are all things that development staff can work with him a lot on and improve and make him even more of a good puck protector and kind of possession manager through the neutral zone and into the offensive zone.
Yeah. It's interesting because you've heard Barry Trotz mention that, his goal is to get faster, in really all areas of the lineup, get quicker, more agile. So what makes you look at somebody like Kumpalainen, who maybe doesn't have that top speed, and still look at and say, okay, this is somebody that, maybe he's missing like the number one component, but he still fits in to, an NHL system somewhere in some role.
Yeah. I mean, I think we obviously have all been kind of taken, we've been enamored with Trotz's comments about how he wants to shape this roster forward. But the reality is like you look at any team in the NHL and nobody has 18 elite skaters. There is a home for guys who maybe can't find that top gear. And I think Juuso Pärsinen's really a great example. I think his skating has come a long way since when I first watched him, of course, but I would still not consider him like fast per se. I think he's got really good pace and a really good motor, and he understands the smarts of when to move his feet, the timing of attacking loose pucks, of attacking open ice to give his teammates passing options, and, having that kind of on ice IQ to exploit plays when you're off the puck without being the fastest guy out there is another way of getting to being quick, to being, a player that has noticeable pace without having like top end speed. So I think there's almost kind of like multiple ways to get there, and Kumpalainen has some smarts that I think will help him achieve that.
One more guy that I want to talk about, and of course it's a Slovakian player. Of course it is with you, Eric. And that's Alex Chernik. And this is a guy that, he's down on the draft boards, but you look at his numbers and they're pretty impressive. 21 points in 18 games with his under 20 team in Sweden, had 3 points for Slovakia in 5 games in the World Juniors. What's this guy's story, and why aren't more people talking about him?
Yeah, well, look, you can't blame me for the fact that Slovakia has just been producing more NHL level talent. No, I mean, I think his story is interesting, and it's kind of similar to Dalibor Dvorsky in a way that both of these guys have really been on folks' radar for a few years now. Chernik was someone who probably 3 years ago was before he really jumped into the U18 and U20 levels, was someone who folks were saying, could potentially be a first round pick, if not a, first half of the first round pick kind of guy. I think the results since, haven't, obviously they've not been like amazing. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking him as kind of a mid-round option, but they haven't been bad. And I think, folks have just been kind of missing that like nuance to what he's ultimately accomplished. I really like his game. This is, kind of the exact kind of player that I think teams should be taking a swing on in this range of the draft. He is so smart, I think, with the puck, without the puck. He really understands, kind of to the point I was just making, he really understands, how to be as efficient as possible and exploiting other teams' weaknesses, other teams' mistakes. And, he's probably not going to score 30 goals in the NHL, but, you want to talk about this team not only getting faster, but getting more skill. Like that skill needs to come at the bottom of the lineup too. And I think he's got, really great puck skills that could complement a middle or a bottom six group anywhere in the league. So.
Is there any concern for you? He's a little bit undersized for a hockey player, 5'10", 179. You think that is any bit of a concern, especially if you're looking at somebody that's going to play a little bit further down the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something that teams have, or scouts have mentioned over the past couple of years, that he's never really like filled out a bigger frame. But obviously this kid is still 18, right? He's got some more years to grow ahead of him. I think to the point about concerns about the size, though, he plays I think a very slippery game, and even with the puck. I've never had major concerns about him like getting knocked off possession or really pushed around. He maybe won't like muscle his way out of every one-on-one battle in the corner per se, but I think his skating mechanics are strong enough that, and his pace is really good that, again, he knows where and when to attack, so to keep himself out of trouble. And on top of that, he, off the puck, I think he can be very annoying in a good way. He's a really kind of pestering forechecker. He is pretty crafty with the stick lifts and the stick checks on opposing players, and forces a lot of turnovers in that regard. So adding that kind of skill to a bottom six as well is super helpful. And on top of that, like a good bit of skill, I think he's got a good release. He handles the puck very well, and I think generally just a very intelligent player. So
yeah. So, Eric, we talked about some good options for the Nashville Predators later in the draft. The situation for the team has changed since we last talked about our first-round options. A notable trade here and there. And now there's a lot of people kind of speculating maybe the Predators might be aggressive night one. Maybe there's talk about maybe packaging a couple picks to move up into the top 10. Maybe one of those picks moves to take a big swing at a player already in the league. What are your kind of thoughts on maybe what you think the Predators might do night one versus maybe, if you could give Trotz some advice, what maybe he should do on night one?
Yeah, I mean, so the chatter has kind of been about them moving up into the top 10, which by top 10, we really mean like kind of 5 or 6 through 10. Because no one in the top 4, I presume, is going to be moving back. It would be quite shocking. I mean, look, I love the boldness, right? Like, why not try? Particularly when you have the most picks of any team at this draft, and it's not like you don't have picks for years to come either. I think the pipeline is in a good place, and this draft is a really great opportunity to help it take another step forward. I think what they might do ultimately, or what they will do ultimately, is probably stand pat. I would be curious about the interest of teams in the back half of the top 10 as to why they'd want to move back, and I'm not sure I quite see it from anyone. Arizona, Montreal, Washington, doesn't really make sense to me. I think St. Louis is potentially an option, but then you get into the idea of like, okay, is moving up 5 spots worth it in such a deep, particularly a deep first round? And I would say it probably isn't. The exception to that might be like if Oliver Moore's sitting there at 10 and you're afraid he's going to go at 11 or 12 and you can just move up with both your first rounders only, like that's a move I would make, right? But, you know, I don't want to sell the farm 4 or 5 picks for Alex DeBrincat, which nothing against the player, but like unclear what the kind of direction of this team would be if they're going that route.
Right.
Or B, you know, to move up 5 spots to get like Matthew Wood when you could get like Colby Barlow at 15, you know. I don't think there's that much of a gap between those 2 players. So yeah, I think ultimately they'll probably stand pat unless some team makes some really interesting decisions. And ultimately, that's probably what I'd tell Trotz to do as well. I think, like I said, this is a great opportunity to really restock the pipeline and get some exciting guys in the fold here. You know, at 15 and 24, you could get 2 guys who, you know, in a weaker draft or another draft would both be top 15 picks. So, you know, take that opportunity. If you want to move up in later rounds, you have the capital to do that. 2 second rounders, 3 thirds, 3 fourths. You know, so unless it's like jumping up to get Matvei Michkov, which would be amazing, I would probably hold on.
So that's a move you would make. You would go up to get him. Any possibility you think that happens?
Like a
what would it take to
chance?
make that happen, I guess, is a better question.
Yeah, I mean, the tough thing, right, is like it's hard for me to tell whether this is just like everyone's kind of like connected the easy dots. This is like the like comparing Matthew Wood to Tage Thompson of like trade rumors where people are like, oh, Michkov's not getting past Washington and like, oh, he wants to play there, blah, blah, blah. And that may well be true, right? And they certainly have a great track record of getting Russian players to come over and you know, making sure they're at home here. So moving ahead of Washington is tough. I would argue moving ahead of Arizona is even tougher, who might also take him. Right. Nothing like unfolds to me in my mind that would like make a team want to make that move as to where they could get Michkov. You know, like I said, 10 maybe, but like I'm certain he'll be gone by then. So.
Yeah. Either way, it is going to be an interesting couple of days for Nashville. Eric, thank you very much for joining us. We know you're going to have a busy couple of days, but we hope to have you back sometime in the near future to maybe talk about what the Predators did wind up doing at the draft. Until we reach that point, though, where can the people find all of your draft coverage this week?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at OnTheFuturePBR. I have been putting out pretty regularly articles about, you know, players to watch for Nashville at every pick of theirs. Released my final top 96 draft ranking last week. I'll be at the draft this week, live coverage there, and a full video breakdown of every pick by the Preds afterwards. And all of that can be found on my Twitter or on penaltyboxradio.com.
Cool. Eric, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Once again, we want to thank Eric Denay for joining us to talk about picks and options for the Predators in the later rounds. Be sure you follow Eric all this week as he continues his in-depth draft coverage, and keep it locked on to Locked On Predators this week. Nick and I will be downtown covering all of the events at the NHL Draft. We'll be bringing you all the news as it happens, so stay tuned. Thanks for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day. We'll be back tomorrow with more draft coverage.